And good morning. Is the video live as well? Yeah. Great. Hello and welcome to Farming Sheffields Fringe. My name is Gareth. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this event. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Martin McKervey to the lectern, High Sheriff of South Yorkshire, to say a few words to kickstart this wonderful event. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you very much indeed, Gareth. Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, very nice to see you. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. As Gareth has said, I'm Martin McKervey. I'm a director of a manufacturing company, AES Cllr. We are headquartered in Rotherham. We have a business in Sheffield and in 110 countries across the world. I'm also the current High Sheriff of South Yorkshire. Whether you're a manufacturing company like AES Cllr or a community organisation working on supporting South Yorkshire Community Foundation, whether you're a voluntary organisation, whether you're a charity, whether you're farming, whether you're Sheffield City Council, I think there are two things that we can say are constant. Firstly, we all need food, and secondly, we face a huge climate challenge, but that challenge also presents us with huge opportunities. The challenges around climate change are absolutely fundamental to our business at AES Cllr. We are net zero in our UK operations, and we aim to be globally net zero by 2029. We've invested in an electric vehicle fleet. We have built infrastructure for charging electric vehicles, and we have created Better World, where we want to work with other organisations on this climate journey. We work with other businesses, we work with South Yorkshire Community Foundation, we work with charities and voluntary organisations, and we've also started a conversation with Sheffield City Council. On that journey, I got to know Gareth. You can see the link. This is very, very important. We are all beginning to build relationships, conversations, dare I say partnerships, as we embrace the challenges around climate and how we're going to work together. If I may share just a few headlines, which I hope will set today's event in some context. I didn't know until Gareth told me yesterday that 1.8 million meals are cooked, served and eaten in Sheffield every day. Food is at the very heart of what we do as a major city. How we feed ourselves impacts on our economy, on our health and our environment. Food must also be seen in the context of poverty, inequality, deprivation, the climate emergency, and of course COVID-19. Sustainable food must, in my view, be a core aspect of the city's climate action plan. A key part of the good food movement is ShefFood, Sheffield's food partnership, a cross-sector partnership of local public agencies, businesses, academic and community organisations committed to working together to create a more sustainable food system in Sheffield. On behalf of ShefFood, I would like to offer my congratulations to the City of Sheffield for winning a Sustainable Food Places Bronze Award. That award was not easily won. It challenged Sheffield to evidence successful action around a range of key issues, promoting healthy and sustainable food, tackling food poverty, addressing diet-related ill health, improving access to affordable healthy food and reducing waste, and the ecological footprint of our food system. All evidence that Sheffield can and does work together to make food better for everyone in our city. But we have more to do. We need actions that not only nourish communities, but also deliver on the city's net zero carbon targets. ShefFood partners, Foodworks, Food Hall, Green City Action, Healy City Farm, Regather and South Yorkshire Climate Alliance are all ready to take the next step to meet the required standard for a Silver Sustainable Food Places Award. They are ambitious and we wish them every success. The Fringe Farming project is part of the Sustainable Food Places programme, led by Sustain, Shared Assets and funded by Farming the Future, all working to boost agroecological food production at the edge of UK cities, working in partnership with practitioners, researchers to greatly increase access to land for socially and ecologically beneficial farming close to our urban communities. This is an important project which seeks to understand the barriers, identify land opportunities, and identify local actions, helping to develop national policy, thereby enabling agroecological farming at the edge of cities as part of a green economic recovery. Currently, gaps in access to information and buy-in from councils and businesses means that opportunities for integrating the social and ecological benefits of peri-urban farming into resilient food systems are being missed. The Fringe Farming project wants to fix this, and what a great opportunity we have through the place-based research which is now taking place in London, Bristol, Glasgow and Sheffield. What a great opportunity for our city. Today's event is a key milestone in Sheffield's involvement in the Fringe Farming project. Before I hand over, on behalf of ShefFood, I would like to offer sincere thanks to key partners and participants. Firstly, a thank you to Sustain and Shared Assets as national partners. Thank you to the funders Farming the Future. Thank you to the lead coordinator for Sheffield, Fran Halsell, Urban Agriculture Coordinator, who, by the way, in the midst of organising this wonderful event today, also decided to get married. Many congratulations, Fran. Thank you to Gareth, Partnership Coordinator. You know and I know how passionate Gareth and Fran are about these issues. We should value their passion and commitment. I'd also like to thank our speakers and presenters. There are a few, but I do think it's important we recognise their contribution. So thank you to the following: to Rob Logan from Sustain, to Heather Hunt from Friends Field and Newfield Springwood, to Darrell Marion from Wortley Walk Garden, Healy City Farm, to Hugh Evans from Sheffield Organic Growers, to Doug Kemp from Regather, to Alison Teal, Cabinet and Executive Member for Sustainable Neighbourhoods, Wellbeing, Parks and Leisure at Sheffield City Council, to Councillor Julie Grocutt, Deputy Leader of Sheffield City Council and Cabinet Member for Community Engagement and Governance. It's great that we've got our City Council represented here today. To Leon Ballon, ShefFood on Sustainable Food Places, to Richard Sully, sitting at the back, the Net Zero Project Director from the Sheffield City Region Mayoral Combined Authority, to Mark Walton from Shared Assets, and last but by no means least, to both Gareth and Fran. I'd also like to thank our studio guests: John LeCorney, Heel City Farm, Sam Bennett from Heel City Farm, Josephine Heckberg from Food Works, Jenny Tibbles from Green City Action, Rob Hardy from the University of Sheffield. I also want to thank Blend Kitchen. What a wonderful host and venue we are in today. A special thank you to Chris Hansen, Justin Roundtree and the whole Blend team. ShefFood has indeed found a new home from home here with Blend. I love the Blend motto, good food does good. I think it's also important that we acknowledge and celebrate the work that Blend Kitchen does in providing structured hospitality training, paid work and experience to people who have been marginalised by a lack of access to rights, resources and opportunities, helping the most vulnerable, promoting dignity with pride, aspiration and opportunity. We thank Blend Kitchen and the team for their social enterprise. Thank you also to the University of Sheffield, with a special thanks to Peter Jackson from the Institute for Sustainable Food and to Ian Knowles for the help with audio, visual and technical support. And thank you all, both here present and those listening in virtually for attending. We have a busy programme. There is something in this for everyone today. What a wonderful opportunity we have to talk about important issues for our city, to make new friendships and to build new collaboration. I want to close with this thought. Embracing the challenges and opportunities relating to sustainable food and our climate is about growing our economy, helping our environment, improving our health and well-being of every citizen in our city. It becomes the very foundation on which we improve our productivity, create more profitable businesses and enterprises, create proper and sustainable jobs, retain and attract talent in our businesses and in our organisations, and a basis by which we can attract greater investment to our city. And crucially, it is also the means by which we can address deprivation, poverty and ill health. The challenges are big, but might I suggest the opportunities are even greater. And together, I do believe we can achieve great things together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for those words. What an excellent way to start today's proceedings. I'm only going to say, just thank you again to everybody that Martin mentioned, and to you, Martin, as well, for opening today's event. It's fantastic that you can be here to join us today. So we're going to move on to our first presentation from Logan, and I think I'm going to have to switch chairs, which is a new thing for us. Okay, so quick switch around. Over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's very exciting to be in Sheffield. I came to university here about a decade ago. Have very fond memories and really enjoyed a little walk around the city last night, kind of getting to know it again, and also putting images to the work we've been doing together with Gareth and Fran in the last few months to actually see the city we've been researching and writing about and presenting in the briefing that we've been working on. It's also quite interesting being in a Zoom room. I don't know if you've ever done it before, but quite an interesting experience. But so thanks for having me. I've been asked to outline why do we want to farm the Fringe? What are the benefits? How can we work with councils to make this happen? So I thought I just would start with where is the peri-urban, kind of thinking about it in terms of its histories, the context that we're living in now and how it relates to that, and also how it connects with urban design and how we think about cities. I'll outline our approach of agroecological farming, the benefits of this and how it can connect with meeting council's targets. I won't go so much into the collaboration of Fringe Farming because we just heard about that, but just to outline some of the work we're doing. And then finally to pick up on some of the emerging actions that borough councils can take that we've identified in the first few months of the programme. So where is this peri-urban? You know, when I talk to my friends about it, they're like, what is your job? What is this peri-urban you're talking about? And in a recent report, it's generally seen as the land in and around the edge of cities, roughly around 2 kilometres. But this is blurry and it's different in terms of different spaces. With the Sheffield briefing, we took more of a regional approach, so a little bit beyond the peri-urban as well. And this picture of Glasgow, which I really like, kind of shows that view into the city, the kind of greenbelt areas that begin to touch more heavily, densely packed residential areas. And historically, we can see that as urban spaces developed, that food growing was often really situated around the city walls or the edge of cities, and especially perishable goods that just made sense to be close to markets. And 50 years ago, if you looked at cities across the UK, you'd see that there were many market gardens that would ring the city, that would bring enterprise across the rural-urban divide. But with the increase of supermarket power in the last 50, 60 years, these enterprises have unfortunately shut down. So one of the things we talk about is like a renaissance of these enterprises, of these markets, these economies. What this has left, though, is that around the edges of cities is some of the most fertile soils in the country. So it also makes sense. The soil is rich and it's good for growing in. In thinking about how the peri-urban connects to urban design and planning, I really like this idea of edge effects, which is an element of ecological design. And it's where between two or more habitats, such as a field and a forest, or an ocean and a beach, you have these transition zones that are very productive, very creative, and there's a lot of resource sharing across them. These are the edge effects. And so if we think about the peri-urban as an edge effect between the rural and urban communities, cultures, economies, it can be a really productive and dynamic space to grow food, create economies of exchange between these different areas. So in thinking about histories, urban design, if we think about the context they're situated within, in the last year we've seen how COVID-19 has kind of placed threats on an import-heavy supply for our food system. And we've actually seen a lot of community food organisations like Regather in Sheffield step into the gaps that are created by a food system that's overly reliant on supermarkets and a centralised global trade system. I'm not sure, there was a recent report to show that there was a case of one veg-bot scheme had 7,000 people on its waiting list. And this reflects the increase in demand for seasonal, regionally produced foods in the last year to fill these gaps. At the same time, we have post-Brexit, and the agriculture policy is being rewritten. So we're also at an opportune moment to really build regional ecological food systems that are more resilient to external threats such as pandemics, climate change, etc. So with this, I guess with shared assets with Mark and before my time at Sustain, this gut feeling of there's something about this peri-urban that we can connect with food, and there was a pilot project in 2020 in London. And just what would it mean really? What would happen? What would some of the outputs be if the peri-urban was used more productively for food? They found that about 60% of London's greenbelt is agricultural land, mainly arable, but a lot of it is used for keeping horses. While if you then converted some of this land, growing cereals and grasslands, about 1%, you could produce an additional 1 million kilograms of fruit and vegetables into the city's food system. So 1 million kilograms relatively in the whole of London may not be massive, but for 1% of the land, I feel like that's proportionately quite a lot. And what would it mean if it was 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.? So we have an opportunity where we also have a new generation of growers that are actively looking for land, actively want to set up enterprises, but one of the limitations of this is access to land. You often hear from producers that they just can't find it, it's too expensive or it's not available. In Bristol, they did a survey and have a list of 80 people who just would like to set up peri-urban enterprises. So I think if we step back and acknowledge there's a demand for land and there's demand for food, we need to connect these dots. And so how do we do that is the real question. The farming we're talking about in our project is agroecology. I just thought I'd briefly introduce it before I go into the benefits of why it's suitable for peri-urban farming, just in case people haven't come across it. But quite simply, it integrates ecological and social principles into producing food, thinking about regenerative food systems, and that really centres farmers' experience and knowledge within that, because they're the people that do the work, so they know what they're talking about. So an ecological principle might be working with natural cycles, not using pesticides, while a social aspect might be workers should get paid decently and have secure jobs, and that communities should have a say in the foods that they eat. If you want to read more about agroecology, you can see the Neolani Forum, and there's lots of information there about that. So, what can agroecology do in the peri-urban? Well, we talk about multiple benefits. It's not just climate change. It's not just fresher food. We can see from the case studies that I'll introduce one in a second, that there's an economic benefit in terms of the number of jobs that are created. Services are produced. There are products that enter into regional economies. There are contracts between different companies. So you're really invigorating community wealth building. There are social aspects. Often agroecology engages in community development methods, brings people together, creates dialogue across tensions, etc., works through them. And also a very strong emphasis on education. The environmental aspects, there's reduction in air pollution, increasing biodiversity, and also in terms of working with soils, rather than pouring chemicals in them, you also sequester, I think that's right, sequester carbon back into the soil. So it's not just carbon neutral, you're actually reducing greenhouse emissions. I wanted to put some kind of emphasis on this is actually happening. This is happening in the UK, it's happening across the world. And a case study is Organically CIC in North East London, where I personally trained as a grower. It's really very nice there. And they have been on a 12-acre piece of land for the last 10 years. The council has supported their development, a major thing being that they were awarded a 25-year lease, which was then kind of extended to a 36-year lease because of some funding requirements. And also the rent was set at covering the council's building insurance costs and also admin for the first 5 years. Once the council saw what the project was doing, they extended this rent level to the present day. So we can start to see how we can have collaborations across public bodies and community enterprises. So after a decade of activity, in the financial year of 2019 to 2020, they nearly hit £1 million of turnover. They had nearly 20 people employed full-time. They also were awarded over £1 million grant for improving some infrastructure facilities that came into the borough of Waltham Forest. They had over 300 volunteers, 200 of them regular. So, and in working there, I know that's true. People really commit to this. Over 200 learners went through their courses with certifications such as AQAs. At the peak of the box scheme, over 700 households were being distributed to. And what I think is interesting here is we're not talking about one project, we're talking about building a food system. So actually there were 20 outlets that were also distributed to, and they also do plant sowing that are then distributed to other gardens. So you start to see that this is actually an economy, not just one single project.
2 minutes,
Wow, okay. I've talked about carbon dioxide. There's also in terms of the species of the plants on site, not just the ones being grown for food, but there were 67 identified, so you really see the benefits of this. These outputs that places like Organically produce can really connect to existing targets. So whether that's in Sheffield and the zero carbon city, or another partner in Bristol on their education and economic targets for their one city approach. So we don't necessarily have to write new targets. This work can contribute to existing targets. I won't go into the Fringe Farming project, as Martin did a really brilliant job of outlining it, and I only have 2 minutes. So but Sheffield is our second city where we've done an event like this. And the process is effectively, we do some research, we create a briefing, we have an event like this to generate an action plan, and we then update the briefing with the action plan that will look to the next 5 to 10 years of what do we do next? How can we take practical steps to make this happen? I'll quickly outline some of the emerging actions that councils can take. So this is across the board. This isn't Sheffield specific, but Sheffield feeds into this. Firstly, it's very useful to generate a food strategy, policies and action plan that peri-urban farming can situate itself in, and that this can be taken forward in councils' local plans. Secondly, it's vital that we can map the land and see where it is, where are the opportunities, because there's what we've come across is there's a lot of unknowns and not really knowing what land is available. So if these could be mapped and made and shared, then we can see how we can create equitable opportunities for diverse communities across the country to set up community-based enterprises. Thirdly, to identify lands on the periphery of urban areas that can be long-term market gardens. In my own experience of community growing, if you have short-term tenancies, it's very difficult to build community, get funding, set up a viable business. Fourthly, to make use of food procurement opportunities, whether that's with schools. In Barnet in North London, they actually have a community farm on a school where the parents buy a veg box scheme, but the food also goes into the school lunches. So how can we integrate this kind of cross-sector systematic approach? Finally, because I know Fran is here, we're very passionate about peri-urban farming, is to support the food growing skills and training programs that exist but can also exist. So a new wave of farmers with the knowledge, resources and land can then set up these food enterprises that really participate in setting up regional economies and regional food systems. So thank you very much. My email is there if you want to get in touch and learn more about the national programme, and I look forward to chatting with you at lunch and hearing all the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Okay, right, we're going to have a short film now. This is actually all about the Moss Valley, which is where Regather, Sheffield Organic Growers, Sheffield Market Gardeners, etc. are all based. You've got the film, haven't you? Yeah. All right. So this film's about 10 minutes long. I will apologise. There's a bit of bad audio at the beginning, but bear with it. It does get better. Right. Thank you.
So here we are on Sheffield Organic Growers, 9 acres of productive market garden and 3 acres of beautiful orchard. And it wasn't always like this. Here we are 2 miles from Sheffield, and it was a heavily industrially fertilised plot of agricultural land, part of a farm. Very low organic material, heavy clay, poorly drained, no worms. So there's a story, and the story starts with the Transition Town Initiative 2007, and in our local area in Sheffield we had a very active group, about 40 people, and who wanted to rise to the challenge of climate change and then peak oil, of doing something locally, getting something going on the ground. And the idea was local food, healthy food for the whole community. So we looked for the nearest land, and here we are. And it's Hazelhurst Farm, John and Aubrey Rose, who were downsizing, coming to retirement age, and their children did not want to take on farming, as happens so often. So there was this land available for sale. So we started a co-op, Hazelhurst Co-op, a community supported agriculture, and launched a community share issue. So here's our leaflet. A big challenge. Hugh Evans, part of the project, is part of a Quaker ethical property company who actually said he would be able to raise the capital. So that eased the project quite a lot. So he was able to actually buy the land, and he had a collaborative model based on Rebecca Lawton's book, Surviving and Thriving on the Land, which is showing that collaboration is a better model than a large co-op or a larger landowner. So here there are 3 separate social independent projects. We had Hazelhurst Co-op, we then had Matt growing for beanies, and Martin for the biodynamic grower for his own veg box scheme, and Hugh provided the infrastructure. So here we have a borehole and water and a tractor and machinery and packing areas for the vegetables, but each project independent but collaborating, learning from each other. So here we are in this beautiful ancient woodland, which is just opposite where we were last filming in Sheffield Organic Growers. So it's part of the Moss Valley Ancient Woodland Corridor. And I was driving up and down the lane, bringing vegetables from Hazelhurst Community Support Agriculture back to my garage where we did the veg bagging, and I saw this sign, wood for sale. And my mother was dying, so it didn't register. And then about 6 months later, she left me some money. And so this is about capital, and it's about privilege, and it's about resources. And I found out from the farmers I knew and the local wildlife trust that they would be delighted if I did buy it. So I did. So it's like expanding the ecological sustainable projects down this lovely lane. So, and it's next to a 15-acre field. And by about 2013, Hugh cornered me and my friend Craig and said, John and Aubrey are trying to sell another bit of land, and you know it's just next to that wood. Would you think about it? And Craig Barnett was very keen at that time to, he'd done a master's in organic growing and really feeling passionate about growing. And we wanted to, so we did, eventually. And it was a field that's even worse condition in a way than Sheffield Organic Growers. Very needed masses of draining, poorly drained, heavy clay. So we set up, we set up a social enterprise called Friendsfield, not limited, not for profit, and with the aim of land reclamation for land-based livelihoods. That was our little strapline for it, and wanted a model like Sheffield Organic Growers, so that we would capitalise the infrastructure and then have different groups of farmers that could work together collaboratively. So we had quite a few people coming. A lot wanted to live on the land, and here we are in Greenbelt, and that is not possible. So that is an obstacle for extending this kind of work. And we for the learning side, we learned a lot from Manchester, the Kindlings Trust, and other CSAs and whole Landworks Alliance, a whole network of people. And for 3 years we sowed a green manure and had it cut and mulched to improve the land, and also had some of that subsoiling done to help drainage, and planted an orchard. And then eventually Regather came along, and Gareth Roberts had been initially involved in the Hazelhurst CSA at the very beginning stage. And so after a period of time, we developed a 20-year lease. So that is how Friendsfield has become Regather Farm. Well, here we are by what's now very low stream, a tributary to the Moss. And so we're part of this amazing wildlife corridor. It goes on for about 8 miles, I think. And as you've been saying, the bluebells in the spring are just superb, and the wood anemones, and all of the other beauties. And so it's a very diverse area of ancient woodland. And so this is very precious, not just because of its biodiversity, but also because of being resilient to climate change. And the more diverse an ecosystem is, the more resilient it is. And here we have, it looks rather strange, like a bridge, but in fact is a leaky dam. And this is a way of natural flood prevention, flood management. Until we have beavers introduced, we're having to do it. Because the moss flows down to the Rother, which flows down to Fish Lake and Doncaster, where the big floods are happening. So it's part of now adaptation to what is happening in terms of climate emergency. So I see, these projects down our little lane with Sheffield Organic Growers, Regather Farm and the Wood, all part of trying to build up resilience to what is happening in terms of climate change.
So Heather, what would you like to see happen in terms of nature-friendly growing for Sheffield and perhaps the Sheffield city region and possibly beyond?
Well, I suppose there are two main things. Increasing land used for nature-friendly growing in a collaborative way. There's so much land in this region which is emitting greenhouse gases, industrially fertilised. So it could be a gradual process, but accelerated when capital becomes available to enable more projects to take off. And maybe changing planning regulations so that people can actually live on the land. So crucial, I think, for young entrants to this whole thing. And the other, right from the beginning of the Hazelhurst Co-op, it was an intention to enable the whole community to be involved in both growing and consuming. And it is a very wide project, so enabling people of all communities to be involved. And that is quite a challenge. And one thing here, although it's only half an hour by car from Sheffield, public transport is not good, and that has really restricted our projects that we've been trying to run. But the other one is about access to growing, and it's what we found out, that you start by volunteering, but that usually means you've got a bit of family behind you and you're in a network. So to really enable black and people of colour to have funded apprenticeships, well supported, would be fantastic.
Okay, thanks to Heather for her virtual contribution. She couldn't be here today, but she's a very important part of the Moss Valley story. Fortunately, we've got several other local growers with us now. We have Hugh Evans, we have Daryl Marion, and also we have Doug Kemp. Now, I'm going to let them individually introduce themselves. They've got about 5 minutes each to have a bit of a talk about what they do, but also this is a bit more of an informal chat about their experiences and what it's actually really like to grow food, not just in this city, but the challenges that face everyone. So over to you, please.
You started first, I don't.
Go on, Daryl.
Okay, well, sympathise with me because I've been involved in this kind of thing since the late 1980s and been trying to see this kind of thing happening since the late 1990s, when I was involved in projects both in North Derbyshire and in Sheffield at that time. So it's kind of really nice to see people talk about this kind of thing and important people being around the desk and talking about this kind of stuff, because that hasn't happened up till now, really. Despite best efforts, it feels as though it's kind of the time's come for some of these ideas to reach more ears than before. So that's great. It's the start of that for me anyway. So yes, I've been interested in nature-friendly farming, or what I would call organic farming and growing, for many, many years. I've been teaching people, hundreds of people, how to grow food in a nature-friendly way for 25 or more years. I've developed countless projects all over the region and beyond, even actually, as a consultant. And the other part of it I've really enjoyed over many years is the teaching, which is something I'm not doing at the moment. At the moment, I'm enjoying a sit down here because the rest of the time I'm a grower most at the moment, working at one of Healy City Farms growing sites, our largest one, at Wortley Hall Walled Garden, which is in the north end of Sheffield, actually in Barnsley area. And interestingly, you talk about how around here the Moss Valley going out south is good fertile land, ripe for development into some more, ecological farming. Interestingly, the Wortley area is it's sort of the far end of the Dearne Valley. The Dearne Valley is somewhere that's being developed in terms of its nature conservation, ex-coal mining area. The Dearne Valley has lots of interesting fertile land as well. There's another aspect of that as well. So, as a grower, I guess the message I gave to Heather and friends back all those years when she was talking about the beginning of the Hazelhurst project was, I don't want to be a down on things, but growing food is hard work and you need a lot of commitment. And so just be aware of that fact, because that's the hard bit. The rest of it can seem quite easy. Setting up CICs, cooperatives, that kind of thing is great. You need that structure. You need the people that understand that kind of thing, but you also need people who are prepared to really put the work in. And I feel sometimes that needs to be valued, recognised and respected, because I don't think it gets enough respect. It doesn't get enough pay for a lot of people. I find it embarrassing to the extent that I rely hugely on volunteers. It's great, they love coming along, they get a lot from it, but goodness me, we need more people trained up and employed in this area, otherwise we'll never get further than this room about it. I'm very interested in how we all work together to develop training programmes that encourage people living in the city to get involved in food growing and all the other aspects around the food economy, the local food economy. I've come across lots of people over the years who would never go to a college to learn these kind of things, but they'll come to a community garden, they'll come to a city farm, and they will learn. And then they're starting to think, oh, I could do this as a job, maybe if someone would give me a job. I've taken school groups round our sites at work and elsewhere where the kids are asking me, oh, what, you can get a job doing this, working outdoors with plants and things? I didn't realise. They're being told in the classroom, you've got to get an academic stream going in your consciousness and you've got to get qualifications in this way or that way and get a clean job. I think often with groups of people that have come from other parts of the world, so I've engaged with Chinese community, Pakistani community over the years and other places, Iranians, all sorts of people. Very often they don't want a career in the land. It's what their forebears did, their parents and grandparents, and to them that was a route to poverty. They're coming here to get a professional, clean job. Now, we have a different value, hopefully, now that we're beginning to develop in terms of what we think about as the importance of food, how it interacts with us socially, culturally, as well as environmentally, and therefore maybe it can be a valued career and clean in a different way, a cleaner environment as a result of the kind of work that we do in a dirty field. And so I think that's something that I'm particularly interested still in. You can tell I'm still enthusiastic about these kind of things after all these years. I want to see more of it happening. I want to see lots more people involved in these things. And I'm here and ready to do my bit for it still while I've got the energy for it. Is that enough?
Yes, thank you, yes. Perhaps you'd like to go next, Hugh.
Okay, I'll go next. So I was a new entrant to farming about 10 years ago. Obviously you've heard some of the history and the film that Heather was telling there. I think at Sheffield Organic Growers we've been quite agile in managing the changes that have happened over the last 10 years. It's interesting because the original community supported agriculture group was only there for I think 2 years, and then after they left we brought in another grower, but their customers remained as customers that were receiving produce from our site. So we've been quite adaptable and agile in that sense. So what Sheffield Organic Growers is now is it's a cluster of 4 independent businesses, all based on the same site, and we share the expensive equipment and the infrastructure, and to some extent we share the organic certification. So the baseline for people coming to be part of Sheffield Organic Growers is they have to agree that we will be growing organically. We're certified either by the Soil Association on most of it and by Demeter on part of it. And so the part that I run is the fruit growing part. That's what I wanted to be when I started 10 years ago. I wanted to be an organic fruit grower. I'd been into a shop in Sheffield and bought some organic apples that I thought were severely substandard, and I thought someone's got to do better than this. And I thought maybe I could. Anyway, so organic fruit growing is the main part of my business. My wife Vicky also runs a small care farm project, working with adults with autism and learning difficulties on our site 3 days a week. So that's the side of the business that I run, along with overall site management, so sort of doing the maintenance and repair of the equipment, the boundaries, all of the other areas that are not in production. So we have Matt West, who's growing for Beanie's Whole Foods. So he has his effectively acre and a half, which he grows his vegetables for Beanie's. He has one customer, so he's growing wholesale. Everything is supplied to Beanie's shop and veg bag scheme. There's Nick Johnson. He's running the main Sheffield Organic Growers veg bag scheme. He grows and packs on our site. I should have asked him how many bags he's packing now, but it's well over 100 bags a week. He has about 5 people working with him now who are paid. And there's Martin Bradshaw and James, who are running the Moss Valley Market Garden, which has a separate sort of brand identity, but it's based still on our site and using our equipment. They're biodynamic, so they're certified by Demeter, the biodynamic certification body. So we've just, I suppose the whole time we've been there, there's been a sort of steady, to use a pun, say an organic growth in the demand. But we've been growing organically, and then with the pandemic last year, there was a huge increase in the demand for our products. So we're packing we're right at the limit of what we can do on the site. Luckily, we've managed to acquire an additional 8-acre site, 8-acre field right next to us. So we're just expanding now from 12 acres to 20 acres. And that land is going into conversion now. And we're doing fertility building on that site and with that soil. So I think over the 10 years we've been there, we've proved that small-scale agroecological food growing can thrive actually without any subsidy. We had a few years of help when we were doing the organic conversion, but for the last 5 or 6 years we've received no public funding or subsidy at all. And from the initial group of 4 of us, there are now 15 people who are paid, who are working on the site. That's not 15 full-time, it's about 10 full-time equivalent. And a huge number of other volunteers and students and visitors, people who are regularly associated with the site, or we host visits from horticultural groups, refugees and asylum seekers. All sorts of people come to our site for all sorts of different reasons, and that's one of the huge advantages of being on the fringe of Sheffield, being close enough that we can have all of these links with lots of different organisations. Sometimes it feels as if I'm spreading myself a bit thinly, but it is great to reach so many people. But the core of it is still the commercial food growing that's going on, day after day, week after week, month after month. We can certainly sell more than we can grow. Our challenge is just to grow enough of quality crops in relatively predictable quantities to supply the veg bag customers that we have. Our structure, the Sheffield Organic Grower structure, is not a formal co-op. It's a structure that we invented. I think it's unique. If anybody wants to copy it, that's fine. It works for us. It may not work for everyone, but we all get on well and get a lot done. It's collaborative. It's interesting that Heather mentioned that towards the end of her film. It's very much a collaborative enterprise. It could be, we could see each other as competitors to each other. I could be a competitor to the veg bag scheme, but it doesn't feel like that. It isn't like that. We're actually a community of growers who are very collaborative. And that feels great. It's a great place to go and work. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Doug?
Hi, Doug Kemp here. I am the grower at the Regather Farm in the Moss Valley. My story into all this starts about, 5 years ago I moved to Sheffield and a friend of mine said if you move back to Sheffield, where I'd been here as a student, you can get a job delivering veg boxes for Regather. So a day and a half a week, just a little part-time thing to get started. I'd been away volunteering on organic farms, like quite long-term, for a couple of years. So the fact that this veg box scheme that my friend was vaguely involved with, as an opportunity for me, was appealing because it was near enough linked to this long-term volunteering that I've been sort of throwing myself into for a couple of years. So I came back to Sheffield and started doing that. Within about 3 or 4 months, myself, Gareth and my colleague Fran were in a wet November field near Dronfield digging holes, looking for earthworms because we thought we were going to try and buy some land and start a farm. Looking back, it was kind of bonkers and we didn't really know what we were doing, to be honest. And the piece of land was absolutely not appropriate at all. But like that sort of ignited a little thing in the back of my head that this organisation that I was just doing some delivery driving for was actually, could be an opportunity for me to get stuck into growing vegetables and having a land-based livelihood, which is something I thought I'd entertained when my time away, but I didn't really know how on earth I was going to make it a reality. So, after the wormhole digging experience on that field, it wasn't that long later that we ended up getting in touch with Heather through the obvious and previously mentioned connections that we have in Sheffield, Gareth being involved in the early days of the Hazelhurst operation. And it became apparent that there was an opportunity for us to get involved in a piece of land. We as Regather, as an organisation, jumped into that process and started negotiating around signing a lease. But also, I said, I want to be the grower, I want to do the veg growing. And there was a little bit of sort of hesitation on other people's behalf because, I'd only really been a volunteer, I didn't really know what I'm doing. That's definitely become, that was right, really. It's really hard. There's loads to learn. It's really complicated. But I did set about trying to learn more. I went volunteering. I volunteered at Hugh's place, at Daryl's place. I went on some training with the Soil Association. And I've had some mentoring from the Land Workers Alliance to help me on my journey to becoming a new grower. We did manage to convince people, Heather, etc., that I was up to the challenge of being the grower. But it's been a really sort of whirlwind journey, actually. And we've done 2 full seasons now, growing veg on the farm. And it wasn't so much the growing the plants that has been the big challenge. It's all the other things that I didn't necessarily realise I'd have to do. So, you have to become like an ecologist, a botanist, a mechanic, a volunteer coordinator, a salesman. You need to know accounting, dealing with the public, dealing with people like DEFRA and legislation, the Soil Association certification, and doing all this practical, like hard physical work all year round, and also like buying stuff. You need all this kit. Where are you going to get it from? What's the best price? What is it the right thing? There's all this stuff out there, and you just, despite how much volunteering you might have done or little courses and training, you don't really know until you get going. And that's been it's taken up an awful lot of time and mental capacity to get through it all. And I didn't necessarily see that coming. However, there's been loads of good help. Often it's Hugh who I turn to because he's only 2 fields away, so it's really, and they've got lovely experience. Daryl as well, and there are other growers, and my network is quite good actually. I think because of all this training and stuff I've been on. So you can tap into this network and find everything out, but it's a lot of work, and it is amazing now, even 2 years in, thinking back to what I didn't know 2 years ago, and I feel a lot more confident. And say if we were going to set up another farm, it would be so much easier now, having done all this. But yeah, there was all this new stuff to learn and deal with, and I didn't really see it coming. But I think we are managing, and we've actually got. Last year I was paid full-time as a grower, but this year we're equivalent of 2 full-time, and so there are 3 other people, and they're all working there now, bringing in harvest. I've got to dash off to go and help them later, but we've already got sort of 4 people working on the land. It's a 15-acre field, and we're only really using a quarter of it at the moment, and it's only an acre of vegetable beds and some polytunnels. But we've got big plans to develop the rest of it, but to do that we need lots more people to get involved, and at the moment it's tricky to think where the skills and where the training is coming from, because I'm not the person to train everyone up fully just yet. So that's a big gap, really, because I don't think we can have people constantly doing kind of what I did, which was, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily want to replicate that, but that's probably what's been replicated across the country, to be honest, and I think that is how lots of people get into it. But it just felt like a bit of a wild ride at times, and if we could make it easier, that would be a lot better.
Which leads me very nicely to let's have a discussion. I've got a question here for you. Give your voice a rest a minute, Doug. Yeah. Yes, seeing as you're all at different stages in your growing journey, I'd be really interested to hear what you think can be done to ensure that land, support and capital are in place to create pathways into farming for new entrants. So there's quite a lot to go at there. Shall we look at land first? What are your thoughts on making land more available?
Well, most land is owned by farmers, and it's interesting. The average age of farmers is median age of farmers is somewhere over 60, I think, at the moment. A lot of them are working well into their 70s and 80s. We've been very lucky in terms of finding a sort of sympathetic pair of farmers who, as they downsize, have been releasing land to us, selling it sort of field by field. But it's been about building those relationships. It's been about building a relationship with a particular pair of brothers who've been running this farm for their whole lives, and they care about what happens to their land after they finish farming. So although they don't have children that they're going to pass it on to, they want to know that it's still going to be in food production, and they recognise that the type of food production that we're doing is very much a growth area. But it's so they tend not to simply put land on the open market, put it to auction, because then they would be committed to just selling it to the highest bidder. They want to develop those relationships first. So yeah, I would say relationships is key. It has been for us anyway.
What about you?
I think also you're looking at small parcels of land, perhaps suburban as well as peri-urban, and even urban. The Hilly City Farm model over however many years it is, 20 years or something, has been to develop community gardens just opportunistically. Wherever we have some kind of partnership, we meet someone and we find there's a parcel of land there that people aren't quite sure what to do with, or they have some kind of aspiration of a garden of some sort. So we've managed to go in there and bring expertise, bring resources, bring funding, fortunately, over the years, to develop those sites. And so they may not be commercial, but they are places where significant amounts of food are being grown, people are learning skills, people are also getting social and well-being, health benefits from being involved in those projects. And so I think of the land that we're running 11 different community gardens at the moment, although some are sort of semi-mothballed because of the pandemic over the last year and whatever. Some's land owned by churches, so churches are open to being approached for these kind of projects. Also allotments, actually. So actually, originally that was an issue, having a group on an allotment, because they're saying, well, we only really rent to individuals, so that had to get changed, and the rules got changed for that. There are actually now group agreements that you can sign, and therefore actually pay a lower rent as a result of it, which is useful. And also the Duke of Norfolk. We run a community garden at Norfolk Park. That's Duke of Norfolk land, so that's a lease there that was arranged many years ago. So there are opportunities. How you could ever try and, you've been trying to map some of this, haven't you? But very hard to find out even who owns some patches. You can see a nice patch of green land. How to find out actually who owns it? Sometimes I don't think even people know who owns it. It's just, sometimes the council said, oh, we cut the grass, but we don't know if we own it. It's just because it's by the council estate. It can be that vague. We actually run a garden in the grounds of a fire station because it's secure there from potential vandalism around the area. At Cllr Valley Methodist Church, the garden is right there by the pavement and the road. It's owned by the church, so they let us run the project. Because you've got houses around it and people walking by all the time, talk to the people that work doing the garden, it never gets damaged, which is an amazing thing, you know, because that's not always the case. So yeah, I think there's always opportunities, especially in Sheffield. There are lots of pockets of green space that can be used this way. I remember going to London many years ago in the earlier days of the Growing Communities scheme there, where they're actually growing a significant amount of, above all, salad greens in lots of different small gardens that then all went to a central place to go as a contribution to quite a large box scheme. It was 600 subscribers back then. I bet it's a lot more now. But they were growing their salads right in the city there, Stoke Newington, that sort of area, in small gardens, very productive. The potatoes and cabbages were coming from Essex and Suffolk because that's where the land is for field scale crops. But where you can grow intensively, and they're growing ecologically, and they're employing a few people to do it, it worked in an urban context as well.
Okay, thanks for those thoughts. Can I ask for some ideas on how we can best put support and capital in place then? So if we look at support for new entrants to farming, perhaps this is one for Doug. What would have made your journey easier over the last couple of years?
I don't know if anything really replicates, like, you know, getting stuck in, but the two things that helped me a lot was I was in the last cohort, and the word important there is last, the last cohort of the Soil Association run Future Growers scheme, which is trying to get people trained up for horticulture. When I went along, it was 6 residential weekends visiting 3 farms around the country, 3 organic farms, and you got like a lecture from someone on soil or a propagation, for example, over the weekend. So that's what that course offered me, and it was fantastic. And I definitely, by the end of it, thought, oh, I could probably have a go at this. Whereas at the beginning, I was still really in the dark, and I met lots of other interesting organic farmers and developed a really good network. That scheme used to be much more comprehensive, and you were like living on a farm or working on a farm rather, for say 2 years with all this extra learning alongside it. But they had to keep scaling it back, and couldn't offer that sort of, you know, that sort of practical element. But it no longer runs either, so that would be, you know, managing to get something like that up and running again would be really good. In the meantime, the Land Workers Alliance have started running a mentoring scheme, which I also found really helpful. But again, it was quite light touch, and because of COVID, we just had mostly online, Zoom-based sort of consultation with some growers. Again, I found it really useful. It was really helpful, especially as I was in the midst of my first season. We did manage to get some site visits in, but again, it was all about theory and discussion and just visiting, and there wasn't any sort of practical angle. But there are 2 things that helped me, and I think developing stuff like that, whether it's through organisations like the Land Workers Alliance or councils or whoever, you know, that those things were what I could sort of hang on to as I went on my journey. So more of that, really.
So do you think there's a role between local authorities, education establishments, and also the existing, agroecological farm support networks? Do you think they should be talking more closely?
Yeah, perhaps. I think there's probably a lot of appetite for it. If people have got the capacity, having the practical space to get hands-on is what we did have it because we were renting our own field, but that came with quite a lot of associated risk, you know. So having those spaces where you can try stuff out would be, that was the missing bit for me in a way.
Okay. Yes.
I mean, I get phoned up quite frequently asking if we'll take apprentices, and there's various support for that. And in things like the building trade, people can go to college 1 day a week and then come to work for 4 days a week. That would be fantastic if there was a college in South Yorkshire offering training that was really relevant to what we were doing. So people were having a structured, building up of their theoretical knowledge in college and then coming to us for solid 3 or 4 days a week of practical experience. That would be absolutely great. It doesn't exist.
Yes, a gap that needs addressing, most certainly. Yeah. Okay, so then we move on to the sort of the nitty-gritty, really, of what can we do to make capital more available? It's always the big sticking point, I feel.
It's interesting. I was just sitting here reflecting. Actually, the value of the crops that are coming off the land, sort of per acre or per hectare, is much, much greater in what we're doing than when it was in sort of previous, larger scale arable or pasture-based farming. So in terms of the financial return, if you were just purely looking at the financial returns, it should be possible for these much more intensive farms growing high-value crops to financially support themselves and to be able to raise capital, raise money in order to get established. I mean, I suppose we're now at a stage where I'm sure we could make a business case to borrow money to expand our operation. Luckily, we haven't had to do that, but it does make financial sense. The base level of rents for large scale farms are actually quite low per acre compared to the value of the produce that can be grown in the kind of enterprise that we're running.
I think there's potential change in DEFRA, government support for farming, where hopefully smaller businesses on smaller parcels of land can actually apply for these environmental land management scheme funding, which, whilst the money you might get from that is insignificant in terms of your running costs, it does give you a certain status that might make it easier to then raise capital. Yeah. And that's how it was being sold to us when we were involved in the pilot. We've been involved in the pilot project, haven't we?
Yes.
A version of it this past winter. That might help as well once we know the full small print details of how that's going to run and what the government decides on what they'll allow as an entry level to that. So we wait and see about that.
Go on.
I've got one sort of slightly curveball point here in all this. That so I follow lots of growers on Instagram. And in fact, it's the only thing I do with my Instagram account. It's follow lots of other growers. It's quite an interesting space actually. And on there, I feel like there are quite a lot of people growing food in a organic way who aren't actually in all the usual conversations with organisations like the ones present here, the Land Workers Alliance, etc. And it's usually quite young people who have followed like maybe a YouTube, an American sort of this is how you do it model, and they're doing things in quite a different way with quite different techniques, much lower startup costs, and a different approach to the market, and they're sort of outside of all the usual networks, but they actually seem to be quite successful, and it's just quite an interesting sort of slightly different way of doing it, because from my point of view, we've gone down a reasonably traditional route of like a tractor, crop covers, organic certification, a barn, etc. Whereas these other people, it's like these giant allotments, using, you might be familiar with the no-dig terminology, and it's all high intensity and sold really locally, maybe with restaurants. They might also be doing things like growing mushrooms in a shipping container, and they're all interested in social media and podcasts, etc. And I just think they've clearly got much smaller startup costs. They're just buying hand tools and compost. And on a podcast I listened to recently with one of the sort of, I guess, forerunners of this little new movement in the UK, they asked the chap what's the most important tool you own, and he said the iPhone. And like, that's how he's doing it, and he's making it looks really successful. So just an alternative little thing to mention there. That's quite outside traditional farming, but does offer a new perspective on new entrants. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that is interesting.
And with no support or grants or anything like that, just small startup costs, own business, entrepreneur.
Yeah, no, that is a really interesting model. I think it takes a lot of the stress out of starting up, keeping it small and then expanding on that. Just one point I'd like to revisit on the DEFRA front. Is it right that they're still not opening up grants to sites under 5 hectares? Is that still
well,
the case?
we were thrown out of the support system for being just under 5 hectares of cultivated land, and at the moment that is the situation. When I agreed to be part of the DEFRA trial to talk about the new support system, I said, well, is there any point in me being part of this? Because, if it's still going to be 5 hectares, it's all going to be irrelevant to us. We don't know is the answer. They've made slightly encouraging noises, but nothing is yet finalised or released. We actually, now with the additional land, we're actually over 5 hectares, but still, I feel for people that are below 5 hectares, I'm trying not to be too dependent on that kind of funding, but as Darryl said, it would be nice to feel we were supported and to feel that all the other public goods that we provide are actually recognised and supported, from the government. Yeah.
But just on that note, we qualify for the DEFRA subsidy, excuse me, because we're just over 5 hectares, and I have to submit a submission to DEFRA. But when you're submitting your claim, you have to say what you have to map your land and say what all the different bits of your land are used for. You have to remove all the things like ponds and polytunnels because, as far as DEFRA are concerned, they're no good. So you don't get money for having those on site. But then when you need to map your vegetable growing area, you have to use what's called a crop code, and there is not a crop code for horticulture. It does not exist. It's like we just don't exist. So when I spoke to DEFRA at length on the phone, they just didn't have an answer. They just didn't know what I should do, and I ended up putting down mixed arable as the code. This is what they advised me to do, which is just bonkers. And there might have been another pathway, but that's what they advised me to do at the time. So hopefully we get our subsidy payment that we're entitled to. But they just small scale mixed horticulture just not on their radar.
So you could say there's a lot of catching up to be done at a national level.
Yeah.
Growers are ahead of the games, particularly maybe the really small ones who are really fast off the starting blocks. So thank you very much for your contributions. We're going to go for a 10-minute break now. So the Zoom will pause for now, and see you all again in about 10 minutes' time. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back. Hope you've had a nice break. To everyone in our virtual audience, wherever you are. We're back in the Zoom room, and we're going to get started with the next part of the proceedings. I'm going to do a short presentation just outlining, I think recapping as well to some extent, some of the points that we've heard already, but hopefully, particularly for our virtual audience, this is a good opportunity just to understand a bit more about the Sheffield context before we move on to the rest of the event today, where we're looking for you guys to get involved as well. So without further ado, a bit about ShefFood, the food partnership. You've heard from Martin earlier and a few other mentions of ShefFood. So it's the Sustainable Food Places member for Sheffield and the cross-sector food partnership for Sheffield. And as you've heard, we're part of not just Fringe Farming, but also other peri-urban growing projects like the Urban Agriculture Consortium. And they're both available online, and would strongly recommend having a look at those to find out a bit more about them. So, what is the current picture? And I'm just going to share a few key points that are made in the Nature-Friendly Food Growing in South Yorkshire report by John LaCorney, who's here with us today. So hopefully I'm getting all of this right. But across South Yorkshire, we've got about 99 acres under agroecological or nature-friendly cultivation, an estimated turnover of £8 million, 100 staff, 2,000 volunteers, 200,000 volunteer hours, and 1,000 hours of support provided for vulnerable community members. I mean, those figures obviously speak for themselves and echo what we heard from the case study earlier from Rob about just what the potential of agroecological food production offers across multiple economic and social outcomes.
Can I just say, probably those 500, not 5,000.
Thank you. We'll get that corrected. I knew we'd get something wrong. A bit more about the other growing sites. We've met some of the growers today, Darryl, Hugh and Doug. So those sites are based around the city. There's High Riggs, Wortley Hall Wall Garden, Sheffield Organic Growers and the Regather Farm. But it's important to point out that a greater than 50% of nature-friendly production is actually in community gardens of an acre or less. Okay, so what we've got is this combination of larger market gardens and micro farms, but importantly, as we've heard, really high potential for yields per acre. And there's a huge, I think, element of human input, of skilled labour, and that's what makes this land, under this type of land use, that much more productive and therefore more efficient. So a bit about community gardens. It's important to recognise that we are looking at a spectrum of food growing sites and food growing techniques when we talk about urban, suburban or peri-urban food growing. But the community gardens form a really important part of that. And, I think we're all familiar with, the if you like, the features of community food growing. But it's about recognising their relevance to an overall food system. So it's about accessibility, it's about access to experience of growing your own, it's about developing new skills and empowering yourself to feed yourself, your household, your family, members of your community, and it's about that kind of meaningful work and the sense of purpose that we all know what getting your hands in the soil does offer on a very tangible and immediate basis. But there's huge challenges around access to land. As we've heard, even from our most experienced growers here in Sheffield, there's enormous challenges on that pathway to becoming a paid grower. And at a community level, these challenges are multiplied many times over, and there really ought to be something to do to tackle that. But importantly, community gardens, are a hugely positive experience for many, many people and offer a really, really critical part of a local food growing infrastructure. The key point here on this next slide, which is where we make this connection between agroecological food production on whatever scale and the net zero agenda, is about what role for food. Increasingly, as the net zero agenda progresses, we see energy efficiency, housing and transport, these big ticket, big picture items dominate the agenda. And I strongly believe, and I think it's a shared belief, that there is a key role for food in that transition to net zero that currently isn't fully understood and offers a huge amount of potential. So, how come, we've got to then jump straight into huge behaviour change questions around energy, housing and transport, but leave food out of that kind of transition? Food is so much more immediate, it's more accessible at an individual or household level. So I think, food plays a key role in changing behaviour. And as a pathway, as a bridge, there's lots of different ways that this particular argument is being made. As an educational opportunity, as a chance to build trust, it plays a key role that I think is not sort of predominant enough in the current net zero agenda. We can look at this at a geographic level as well, whether we're talking about communities, neighbourhoods, wards, district centres, particular relevance here in Sheffield, all the way up to sub-regional and regional level. We've got to ask the question, what role for food in net zero? So picking up on, I think, the training and skills agenda that has been mentioned a few times today already, is, community gardening, how can that offer the start or a stepping stone on this route to professional growing? There is a food economy, a local food economy that is growing, and there's huge amounts of evidence of that, particularly given the impacts of COVID. And this offers an opportunity for business startup, business development and growth, but we need to recognise this kind of complex ecology of support, of opportunity, of experience, and community gardens are the incubators for that to happen. And I'm pretty confident, myself included, that at some point connecting with a community garden, whether that's in a public, private or local authority space such as an allotment, has been that kind of really important catalyst for moving towards sort of career choices around growing. So let's see more of this as part of that route to professional growing. So there's another important question about scale. Why is it that cities should grow agroecological food on a commercial scale, because there is this kind of question of scale at a community level all the way up to a more commercial level that we need to recognise and address. So there's really important opportunities around transport, reduced packaging, greater nutrition density, which is a key term that's going to be becoming, I think, much more widely understood and widely used. It's not just about quantity, it's about the quality of food that we're producing and who it is that's eating that food. Who is it that's most in need of more nutritional density in their food, and how can we meet that need locally using the resources that are available to us. It's also about the role of agroecological food production in terms of how it cares for the land and for the wider environment. And I know, amongst the audience here, there'll be many people who don't need convincing of the environmental benefits of agroecological food production, but we do clearly need to do a lot more to promote these benefits on a wider scale, particularly at policy and decision-maker level. We heard from Hugh. He made the point, and I'm really pleased that he made this point, and it's not just me telling you about it on a slide. The farmer medium age is 60. Who's going to feed us in 10 years' time? If that doesn't get you up in the morning thinking about, right, what can I do next? I don't know what will. Okay? We've got to think about how it is that food is valued. And I think this is something that's shared across all of the, if you like, the food system activists, not just here in the room, but in the audience and in a wider, sustainable food movement. Because it is that question of how we value food, whether it's local food production or food surplus redistribution or any other part of a more sustainable food system. It's got to be a values-based issue. And one of the kind of key aspects of changing that culture is about valuing food producers. And I think Darryl also earlier highlighted some of the key issues around that, levels of pay, quality of work, the kind of opportunities and pathways that people need to create for themselves. Where's the support that makes that more accessible? So we need to see land access, we need to see good training, we need to see the right kind of business support, and we need to see those routes to market. Now, ShefFood, over the past few months and years, I guess, but particularly over the past few months, we've been promoting a vision which we've sort of labelled the Green Wedge, and this is more about understanding, an opportunity, and it's not the only opportunity of this nature in Sheffield by any means, but we felt that it was a really important way of articulating, what it is we're trying to see happen. We want to see practical examples on the ground, and so, this vision for South East Sheffield, about tapping into the opportunities, moving out from the city centre through areas like the Gleadless Valley and then into the Moss Valley, are really significant. And we need to look at that as an opportunity for a whole systems framework of infrastructure and development. So, in order to achieve that, I'm not going to go into all of the details of the vision. It is available as a discussion paper widely online. It will be circulated after this event again. It's been out in the public domain for a few months. But one of the key things that we're pushing forward is the development of an urban agriculture task force. That will identify opportunities, formulate responses to land becoming available, and act as a link between future farmers and the council. So I'm just going to busk a little bit because I can see the last slide of my presentation isn't actually here. So I'm just going to remember a few key points here. So my last slide was about identifying opportunities to develop food partnership activity in Sheffield. And so I think it's very important to recognise the role of food partnership activity, not just as a singular, there's a food partnership, but as a verb of, a doing activity, doing food partnerships. And we need to look at that as an opportunity to develop food partnership activity in Sheffield. So what do we need to achieve that? We need to see the role of ShefFood as a food partnership develop. It needs to be more widely recognised. We need to find ways to engage not just with our council as our local authority, but also our city anchor institutions. We've got a fantastic opportunity around the bronze to silver pathway. where there are useful opportunities for both local authority and city anchor institutions to make direct contributions to the ongoing development of food partnership activity. And there's also some, if you like, low-hanging fruit opportunities like signing the Glasgow Declaration, like endorsing a skills and training strategy for horticulture in the city and in the region. And there's a few more that I have currently forgotten, but there we go. So it's simply about making the case, and I think that hopefully brings us comfortably into the next part of the today's session, where I'm going to invite Julie Grocutt up to the lectern to speak on behalf of Sheffield City Council about a few key points to do with food and our local authority. So, Julie, if you'd like to come up, I'll just get your presentation.
I'll not use it, just that's fine.
You don't want to use it? Excellent.
I'll just sit here and go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really good to be here. I probably spend quite a lot of my time going to many and varied conferences. And I have to say that this one is really good. The energy, the feel in the room, the ideas, the enlightenment, you know, you've got it all really. So it's been really good to be a part of that this morning. I'm a local councillor in Stocksbridge and Upper Don, and the first thing that struck me this morning was something that Rob said very early on about, agriculture and growing in schools. I went to school in Rotherham in the 1970s, and we actually did that, and we had a rural classroom in the grounds of the school, and we did growing and horticulture and all sorts of things, and it was absolutely fantastic. And it just got me to thinking, how did we lose that? And I think that is really, really disappointing that we're now talking about, having to bring something back that, way back when was just part of my normal everyday school life. So I think it's quite disappointing, really, that we're having to re-engage this. So I suppose the thing is, it can be done and it can work. And I think that's something that's really important to cling on to. I think, first of all, congratulations. You've done some fantastic work. Getting the award as well is really, really good, and I'm absolutely delighted for everyone who's been involved in that. And certainly, I know the commitment I can give from both Alison and myself will be to work with you as closely as we can to get you to the next stage. I think it's really important that we do that. My own experience as a local councillor, my ward is Stocksbridge and Upper Don. That's the part of the city that I live in. We have allotments absolutely littered all over my ward, and certainly since the pandemic they are something that the demand has always been high, but it's absolutely risen exponentially in terms of people wanting to become involved, use their gardens, use the local allotments to grow produce, which I think is really good and really does need to be encouraged. I've been involved with a number of projects that we have locally who are running local small community gardens attached to local community centres. One of our local Friends of a Park group, a couple of years ago, I was involved with them planting a community orchard in the park. So there's lots of really good local initiatives that I've got going on in my own ward. We have Grief House Farm Trust that does a lot of good work with disabled people with mental health issues, learning disabilities, with the Boy Scouts, with the Girl Guides, with anybody who wants to come along and get involved. And what I really like about their project is that they're also engaging with lots of young people, because I think that that's really important, that young people understand the needs and the benefits. We also have another great organisation called Garden Partners. They go out into the community doing lots and lots of good work, again with volunteers. So there is lots, I think, happening across the city that we can use, that we can build on and grow on, which I think is really important. But one of the important messages for me today that I wanted to come along with, and it's something that we haven't really touched on yet, but I think is crucial to everything that you're all doing, is to just take a moment to think about food poverty and the issue and importance that goes with food poverty. back in December 2020, when all our lives were quite different, one of our scrutiny committees at the council decided that they wanted to do some work around food poverty and look at what that meant for the city. The working group took evidence from a number of stakeholders across the city, from the food industry, from our universities, and most importantly from people who were suffering from food poverty, to make sure that their voices were heard and we actually understood what that meant for them, because that is really important. A number of outcomes were reached by the committee, and they highlighted that for how many families a healthy diet is actually unobtainable, which I just think is really quite tragic. A number of issues were identified: insufficient income, welfare issues, debt, access to affordable food. But the one that probably is most striking, well, if they're not all really, for all of you, was just that fresh food was not being stocked in local shops, that the access to it just actually wasn't there. So I think that's something that, you know, gives me heart when I hear about all the really good work that is going on across the city right now. It's something that we can do tangibly to do that, to resolve that issue. So as a result of that, the council committed to developing a comprehensive network of food support across the city. That's work that has very slowly started because, of course, the pandemic unfortunately has got in the way. But that's not just about making sure that we've got the traditional food banks and that the food banks are there to help people, but it's about bringing people together around the whole of the food industry and about encouraging what you're all doing, what we want to progress in terms of building the food economy, getting people growing food within our city, within and across our city. They started a mapping exercise. They've got a number of places on the map where things are happening, but I think again that's something that we need to work in partnership to grow and expand so that we have a really good and important picture of that. And I think it's also worth mentioning today that the food and wellbeing strategy and the importance of having that, because we all know that, you know, what we eat affects our health and well-being. That obviously is something that we take for granted, but for a lot of people that does cause some quite serious issues and concerns because of, more often than not, what they're not eating more than anything. There's lots of good work going on in the council at the moment, looking at contracts and procurement to make sure that what we are doing is more sustainable. I think that's something that we should encourage, that we need to do a lot more of. I understand that the current suppliers of our school meals, their suppliers are predominantly from the Yorkshire region, with 25% of food spend done within a 50-mile radius of the city. We use lots of local companies, so that's good news. But again, that's just one example of many that we need to look and we need to progress. I was really pleased Gareth mentioned the local area committees. They're something new that we are in the process of introducing across the city. Basically, as far as the council goes, the city will be divided into 7 areas, each which will have a local area committee. We want these very much to work in partnership with local people, with community groups, with individuals, to drive the local agenda for what you want as that local committee. So I think that they will be a really good and positive starting point for the work that you're doing. I think it will be really good if we could get a local food champion engaged in all of those, and that could bring a lot of the work forward as we try to drive this agenda on. So thank you for the invitation this morning. The only, I suppose, gloomy point from me is I have to leave at midday. I've got another appointment I couldn't get out of, which I will be late for. But thank you for your time this morning. Thank you.
Hi everyone, hello, thanks Julie. My name is Leon Ballin, I'm the Programme Manager for Sustainable Food Places, and we support collaborative food system work at a place-based level, basically supporting this kind of thing, people coming together to make the food system better. I was asked to ask you guys a question, which, in short is, what can the local authority do? But I'd like to just set the scene for that, because I've been to probably too many meetings where there's sort of, what is the council doing about this? What is the council? Without people really understanding what is in the council's powers to do and how complicated, the internal workings of local authorities are. So, what we're talking about really is a vision for Sheffield for a better food system. But it really does need to be a collaborative effort with the local authority included. And the reason it needs to be collaborative is because of, well, as Julie outlined with food poverty, but also that poster over there, which is the food system. Any attempt to change one part of the food system without engaging with other parts will not be effective. So it's about collaboration, it's about creating a good food movement where everyone from a strategic level to the grassroots are all moving in the same direction. I think we can all agree that, Rob really well outlined actually what the sorts of levers are within the local authority's power to help create, a better food system, particularly around the sort of growing that we're talking about today. And that includes planning, only local authority can do that, some procurement, some housing, connections with other public sector bodies like NHS trusts, education, estates, of course, very important, land, and so on. I also know that the reason that you two guys are here today is because you're kind of on side with all this. So I thought we'd skip the what you can do question and move straight to the how do we do it. Because I think a lot of people in this room are quite interested about how do we engage with the local authority, particularly those departments or people who aren't quite on board, and how do we get buy-in from senior leadership and so on. How do we get that message that this needs to be a collaborative effort, not only for Sheffield, but within the local authority as well? So it's kind of a bit of advice from you guys about, how do we approach Sheffield City Council when making the asks that Rob and others have outlined. I don't know who wants to go first with that question.
Well, I'll just say one word and then I'll let, a couple of words and let Alison fill in. It's really very easy. You talk to Alison.
We've got an answer.
Okay, can I be the food champion?
You can.
Excellent, okay. So I should probably introduce myself. My name's Alison Teal and I am the portfolio holder for Sustainable Neighbourhoods, Wellbeing Parks and Leisure. But curiously within that there is public health, there is ecology, there's allotments, and so I've got a lot to do with this sort of area and I'm extremely passionate about it. I helped to establish a community garden myself at Kenwood Hall. That's the old kitchen garden there. And it's been just a magical experience to discover the wonders of soil, and that you probably all know, but a handful of soil contains more microbes than there are people on the planet, which is absolutely incredible. And so it's just this amazing thing. And so, yes, I have tremendous enthusiasm for it. I'm hearing that what we need is land. I'm hearing we need training. I'm hearing we need investment. I was really excited to hear about what Heather said about the community investment, the share offer they had for Hazelhurst Farm. Yeah, I think it sounds like a terrific idea. I think there'll be a lot of people who are interested in. The High Sheriff agrees with me, so I must be right. So I think we've got, as Julie's already said, tremendous enthusiasm here, tremendous energy, a lot of skills and experience. I have no expertise, but I understand how important this is. I understand the climate crisis, the ecological emergency that we're facing, the need to nurture and nourish nature so that it can give to us. We can't keep taking from the planet and expecting it to provide the food for us that we obviously absolutely need. So in terms of what can we do, I think it's about changing the culture in the council perhaps, getting officers on side. These are the sorts of things that Julie and I can be really active in doing at the moment. I'm wrestling with Parks and Countryside to get them to stop using glyphosate. Now, these things are really important, stopping the pesticides and herbicides, retraining staff. Apparently one of the problems in that department is that a lot like the farming profile, there's a lot of people who are getting close to retirement, and there's a lot of assumptions made about mature people, being one myself, that we don't like doing new things or adapting to things, not being flexible. I don't think that's true. I think that people who are 60 are certainly very capable of learning new ways of doing things. And I think a lot of the managerial level perhaps fear that. They fear introducing new things. They think there's going to be a bit of a backlash from staff. I don't agree. So I think that these are things that we can address. These are things that we can change. And I'm up for it. And I think that Julia's as well.
Great, thank you. That's great to hear. I've forgot another question then, related. Sheffield has got its Bronze Award, which is incredible. It is the only evidence-based, place-based whole food system award in the world, as far as we know, sustainable food places. And as it moves towards silver, and I recommend anyone goes onto the SFP website and looks at the current silver award holders, Cardiff, Middlesbrough, Cambridge, and also the gold ones, which is Brighton and Bristol. What they've managed to do is create the whole local authority move forward, particularly in areas where it's quite difficult for some people to access, particularly things like procurement and planning can be a bit of a black box for a lot of people about how do you get a route, how do you influence there, how do you talk to those people. Is there any advice on how the food partnership and the people in this room approaches the local authority, particularly around areas that they're maybe haven't got contacts with, or they understand a little less than other departments? Like public health has always been a friend of sustainable food, for instance. It gets a little more difficult with some of the other areas in the local authority.
I think there's a couple of things that I would say in relation to that. We do have an ethical procurement policy, so I think that's always something to just keep nudging the council about, do what you say you're going to do. But I think also, quite importantly, we now have the local area committees, and if you have got, your local organisations, speak to your local councillor as your first stop. Get them on board and get them to do the work for you. Make sure that, they are invested in what you're doing. They can see the benefits for their local community, and get them to help you on that journey, I think would be a really good first starting point for some of that, definitely.
Yeah, I think, certainly anyone here, obviously you're welcome to contact either of us, and you know that we're receptive. And so it's about identifying the people that you think are going to be helpful to you, and then going from there and ask to have a meeting. I think face-to-face is really helpful. If you're just sending out emails and what have you, so actually ask, can we meet you, or can you come and see this project that we're looking at? It's always great to get out and about and go and actually see the land and meet the people who are engaged in it and wanting to create something. And then when you feel that energy, then naturally we want to go along with that. We want to be helpful with that. So I'd encourage you to, actually, I know COVID's made it difficult, but invite people to go outside and meet with you and hear about what your dreams are.
Thank you. So connect with the person and then take from there. I've been prompted for another question around food strategies. I was involved with the food strategy that came out of public health quite some time ago. It was revised, various things happening. Most of the places that our national programme is involved with has a food plan or strategy that covers the whole food system and includes the local authority, but also all the other stakeholders. It'd be really good to hear your thoughts on whether we need a food plan or a food strategy in Sheffield or for the city region, and where is the energy for that going to come from within the council, because I think the energy for it already exists out there in other sectors.
The Urban Agriculture Task Force, I think it would be great if we could just be a part of that, and the council being a part of that, then we can really make things happen. There is a food strategy. It was written in 2018. It's from a public health perspective, so it does focus on things like obesity and those sorts of issues. So it hasn't really got quite the right angle that we need it to. We need a food strategy that's very much informed by the climate and ecological crisis, and informed by what I think is going to be excuse the pun, a huge growth area. You know, we're going to have a lot of small businesses. I think we're going to have a lot of small businesses. I really am actually very keen on urban agriculture, and I'm wanting to see more of that as well. Watched an amazing documentary recently called A Need to Grow. Don't know if people have seen that. It was really inspiring, and they had like a cement ground, and they called them soil socks, and they had like sort of fairly big long nets full of soil, and the yield from that was extraordinary. So you can grow in lots of places. It doesn't have to even be ground, it doesn't have to be the soil. So it's just there's so much we can do, and I really feel like this is a new area that we really have to champion and really push.
That's great. It's brilliant to be in a meeting like this. Where
Can I just take it somewhere else? I'm John McKervey from BBC Farming. As I'm over 70 and still active. Can I ask? To me, the first thing about food growing is soil. So can I ask about compost, and can I ask about green waste collection and food waste collection? And are there any plans to turn that into compost that can be used by urban agriculture and community gardens?
So,
John, I'm going to repeat the question because then it gets picked up by the mic. So John's question is urban green waste. I think this is right in saying, you know, how can that be processed better to be used as useful compost on land?
Yeah. So I'm already having conversations with Paul Wood, Councillor Paul Wood. So he's got the portfolio that includes the waste strategy, and we're talking about getting a zero waste strategy for Sheffield. And that will obviously include food waste and green waste. And so that's the policy is, you know, we're talking about it, we're formulating it, we're far behind, I agree, we should already have it in place, but that's something that we're already actively working on.
Thank you. So I've got a last question for you guys, because I always feel like these end up being like a bit of a grilling, you know. It's like local authority people can ask, what can you do, what can you do? But, you know, and some of the answers, all the answers have been absolutely fantastic. It's great to have you both as champions of what we all do. But it's sort of turning it around the other way. I mean, you know, what can we do as, you know, businesses, growers, communities, you know, everyone in this room and the wider food system? How can we better support what you're doing and connect with, you know, your priorities and so on? So sort of turn it around and, you know, sort of what can the council do for the community? What can the community do for the local authority?
I think everybody who's got a voice needs to use it. We need to make people, you know, aware of the values and the benefits. On our table, we've been talking about the fabulous slide that Rob put up, you know, with all the benefits on there. And I think it's just about using our collective voices to shout about that, because when people see that, you know, what we're all doing, what we're all trying to achieve becomes a no-brainer, really. It just makes it common sense. So it's about just giving a voice and using opportunities. You know, the three guys who are doing the growing, you know, talked about the networks that they've got, and it's just expanding the networks. Let's start talking more to local businesses, and I suppose that's where Alison and I come in terms of trying to pull some of that stuff together so that we have got better connections. We can, you know, get the message out there, and I think you've all got an important part to play in doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say make sure that you keep us in the loop and bring us in, invite us in, invite us to the meetings that are relevant, invite us to the task force, make sure that, yeah, we're well informed, because I'm not an expert. You guys have got all the information, and we need that. So don't be afraid to formulate plans around, say, for example, training. I believe that Sheffield City Council has a capacity to be a training provider if it wants to be. And so, you know, like, help us work these things out and let's get going, because, you know, we really do. I think that it looks like there is a skills shortage, and we really need to, you know, it takes a while to train people, obviously. I really love the idea of, you know, 1 day's training and working in the field sort of 4 days and that sort of thing. I think that there's tremendous scope, but it's about, yeah, we really need that information. it's silly for us to go and do lots of research when you already have all the knowledge. And so if you help us formulate those plans, then everything can happen that much faster.
Thank you. Alison, Julie, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So I think we're taking a 10-minute break. So that's back at 12:10, yes? Okay.
Cameras on. Okay, and welcome back to our virtual audience, back into the room. I hope you had a nice break. And just to briefly introduce our next speakers, very pleased to welcome Richard Sully from the Sheffield City region, the Net Zero Project Director, and Mark Walton from Shared Assets. And we're going to explore the kind of debate around the net zero agenda and agroecological food and farming. So Richard is speaking first. So Richard, over to you. Thank you.
You've kind of covered my first slide a little bit, Gareth, but we'll do it anyway. So I'm Richard Sully. I'm the Net Zero Project Director for the Sheffield City Region Mayoral Combined Authority, which is the world's longest job title. I live in Sharrow, so about a mile over the hill, and I've been in post since 1st of April this year. And it's my role within the Sheffield City region to mobilise the net zero programme that we have, to see how we deliver on our pledges around the climate emergency and our pledge to be net zero by 2040. And that work fits into a bigger vision for the region. If any of you have had sleepless nights and read the Sheffield City Region Strategic Economic Plan, you'll know that it has sort of three pillars, three overarching objectives around growing the economy. Obviously, we need to be a stronger, bigger economy. But we need to ensure that everybody has fair opportunity to contribute to that. And we need to do it, and this is the first time that this has been included in a policy document like this, in a green way. So essentially, it fits into stronger, fairer, and greener. And it's not a spoiler to say that everything we've talked about today fits really neatly into those categories. How we can build new jobs, new skills for people, better health outcomes for people, and how we can do that while at the same time satisfying our requirements for meeting our net zero agenda. So this was really quick. I just jotted these down, literally. About what the potential impacts of this fringe farming project and projects could be. So increasing the ability of our soils to sequester carbon. We went through an interesting exercise recently where we looked at the whole region and we mapped it in terms of what's woodland, what's gardens, what's built up areas, what's agricultural land, and what each of those pockets of land do in terms of carbon. They all emit at the moment. Very little of our land sequesters carbon. And you say, well, what about our ancient woodlands? Ancient woodlands pretty much sit in equilibrium. Agricultural land as we define it at the moment, and the use of nitrogen-based fertilisers, use of diesel-driven equipment, tilling soils, all those methodologies actually are a net contributor to the carbon. So looking at changing our methods of how we farm land can actually improve the soil carbon, so what you absorb. There's an opportunity to reduce the food miles. So currently we drive in food in big refrigerated trucks from all over the country and the world, and it covers a lot of distance. And if you look at that purely on an emissions basis, that's a lot of diesel that we're burning to get our food from where it's grown to where it's eaten. If you grow your food and sell your food locally, there's an opportunity to reduce the packaging. You don't need to pack it as much as you do at the moment. Most of food packaging is there to protect the food, to get it from where it's grown to where it's sold. We can reduce the processing. potentially. Again, if you're growing food and transporting it at a distance, often it's better to process it and deliver it cooked. So you're buying tins of beans, you're buying cooked produce that's cooked at site. If you're growing it locally and you can reduce that time from farm to fork, you don't necessarily have to do as much processing. Lower transport emissions, it's linked to food miles, but if you don't have to transport things as far, there's the opportunity to use better transport methodologies. So the fleet of cargo bikes that, in my utopian vision, Sheffield streets and South Yorkshire streets are full of cargo bikes delivering our food. So they kind of fit in with the net zero agenda, but also more employment opportunities. And we've talked about that, and lots of the speakers have talked about that today, about the fact that at the moment there is a reliance a lot on volunteers, but there are opportunities to turn those into trained, skilled staff and full-time equivalents. And Hugh mentioned that before, how he's taken from not many people working there to now having the opportunity to bring more people on board. Access to healthy food, it was talked about previously by a speaker. We have issues around food poverty and access to healthy food. If you've got that grown locally, there's the opportunity to open that up to more people. Education and outreach, how you train people, how you inform people, how you get people to understand how food is grown and the impact that it has on the planet and the impact that it has on their bodies. And skills and training. People can use this to as a stepping stone to other things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will be a farmer if you're learning entrepreneurial skills from one of our local growers. It might be that you set up a business that's completely different, but you're getting those basic skills. As Doug mentioned, you've got to learn everything to be a trader in this. You've got to know how to talk to policymakers. You've got to know how to talk to government departments, bankers, access to money, all those kind of skills which you could use in any area. And there's potential in terms of growing the economy locally, more local labour, more jobs, more people earning money locally. They'll spend that money locally. We're supporting local businesses. When you look at the sort of food web and the business web for a lot of this industry, it is all local. And that keeps the money locally and it improves the opportunities locally. So those three pillars of the economic plan for the region, you can see how this kind of activity fits neatly and ticks, all those boxes. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges around this. How do you encourage this? Do you need a Heather who can invest? We need to find other ways that we can allow people access to this kind of business where they may have the enthusiasm but they don't have the capital. How do we upskill when we haven't got necessarily the training locally? Again, it can't always be that you've got to go and volunteer on somebody else's farm. To have that opportunity is not open to everybody. So I think there are challenges around how we do this, but there are opportunities that greatly outweigh that. So that's just all I really wanted to say, really just to sort of set the scene of how I see that this fits into the regional agenda around low carbon, but the wider agenda of a greener, stronger and fairer economy. Thank you.
Thank you. And you'd have thought that we consulted about this, because I think we're...
I'm hoping you're going to back up everything I've just said.
We're on much the same page about this, which is great. So, how do we get that to work? There we go, slideshow from the beginning. Great. So I'm Mark Walton I'm Director of Shared Assets. We're one of the partners in the Fringe Farming project nationally. I'm no climate expert, so I've had to do a bit of research and learning for this. But it also kind of goes alongside another project that we've been working on recently around peri-urban farming, which is an international project called Urbanising in Place, where we've ended up focusing a lot on soils and on the role of farming in helping to sort of metabolise the city, in helping to kind of manage the flows of things like water and carbon and energy and waste. And so I think this speaks to a lot of that. At Shared Assets, we're focused on the management of land for public benefit and community benefit, so forms of land management that create livelihoods, that enhance the environment, have some degree of community control, create shared benefits for landowners and the environment, and are productive. So this kind of farming fits all of those, I think. And as you were saying, the greenhouse gas emissions in the UK, about 10% of those currently come from agriculture. This is according to the NFU. So a not insignificant contribution to our overall national carbon emissions. And quite a lot of this comes from the soil, from the loss of organic carbon from our soils, through erosion, and through the ways that we plough and till them. And so that has two impacts. One is around increasing the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. The other one is that it's reducing the ability of our soils to retain water, so we get more runoff, we get more flash flooding, and as we get more persistent rain through and extreme weather through climate change, this is becoming an increasing issue in many parts of the country. And so quite a small, 1% increase in organic carbon can really massively increase the ability of our soils to hold water. But most of the emissions are coming from nitrous oxide, from the use of nitrogen fertilizers to sustain high yields and to sort of ameliorate the damage that we're doing to our soils by the way that we farm. So we're in this sort of vicious cycle of harming our soils and then needing to replenish them in ways that are also contributing to climate change. And one of the, sort of when we think about urban farming and bringing food growing into the urban environment, quite often the ideas of sort of vertical farming, of plant factories, are sort of posited as a way of bringing some of those high-value crops into the urban area and reducing things like food miles particularly, but also because they're closed systems, reducing water usage, and increasing crop yield. They're very productive systems, but they do still create a lot of emissions. They're using energy for lighting, for pumps, and they take more energy to run these things than your average greenhouse. So that might be part of an answer, but they still have their issues in relation to climate change. Rob talked about Organic Lee in some detail, so I won't sort of labour on that, but I want to give an example here because they're an organisation that had a recent farm audit a couple of years ago now, looking at their emissions, and came up with some really, I think, startled them in terms of the results. So they are emitting as a result of their activities on site. But that's more than offset by the sequestration and other aspects that are happening on the farm. So they're in net negative in terms of their carbon balance. So they're sequestering carbon. They're a carbon sink for the city. And so if you think about multiplying that out across the peri-urban area and the contribution that can have, so not just reducing our emissions, but starting to sequester carbon back into the land. And breaking that down, some of that is coming from things like hedgerows, some of it from woodlands, but some of it from things like recycling. But most of it, by far the biggest portion of that, is from soil organic matter. And I think one of the things that we've learned through the Urbanising in Place project is quite often, we talked about the importance of small food growing spaces and kind of these urban spaces as well, where quite often the soil is degraded through development, through lack of care, and so there's a job to be done in rebuilding those soils. And so there's a real opportunity here for kind of increasing the organic matter and increasing the soil health of our urban soils and repairing our urban soils. And so the potential climate change benefits around these, obviously reducing losses of soil carbon to the atmosphere, then sequestering by building up soils, which has this, these multiple benefits of increasing biodiversity in the soils, building up kind of the soil microbial communities, increasing water retention, and reusing organic urban waste streams. So the question was asked about green waste. And I think one of the learnings from Urbanising in Place and our colleagues in Rosario in Argentina, where they have an urban agriculture program, has been that they've been really specific about the waste streams that they're trying to capture from the city to do a specific job of rebuilding their soil. So they're not just saying we'll take all of the green waste, they're saying actually what we need is these specific nutrients. So we're going to go after the brewery waste. So we're going to go to the brewers and get the brewery waste, because that will build up some elements of the soil that we need. We're going to go to the abattoirs and get the stomach contents of cows, because that's what we need to build up our soils. And so they're being really technical about this. They're not just kind of going, we'll take any old waste from the urban waste stream, but they're beginning to metabolise some of those waste streams within the city and creating these sort of closed-loop systems within the city. Obviously, there's reducing emissions from artificial fertilisers because they're not using them, but also working from low-impact principles. So you talk about kind of delivery bikes and that sort of thing. So using renewable energy on site, all of those sorts of things. So I think there's a real opportunity here for peri-urban agroecology to really contribute to a net zero set of targets and ambitions for our cities. And on top of that, they're creating new community green spaces. So this is similar to Organically. This is Wolves Lane, where again it's agroecological growing in local authority-owned glasshouse space. But with Organically, they've recently got investment from the Mayor of London's fund around green growth. And are going to be building a new community centre, providing education, providing learning around food, community kitchens, and so creating a real community hub and making what was, sort of did have some community use, but was, had in the past been a council plant nursery into a new community green space. And if there's something that we've all learned about, in the last year and a half, is the value of good quality community spaces and community green spaces around our cities, and so they're fulfilling multiple functions, as you said, as well as the skills and the training and all of the other stuff that we've talked about today. So these are real community facilities and not just another type of farm. And so I think there's multiple opportunities here to provide both social, economic and environmental benefits from peri-urban agroecology. That's it from me.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Richard and Mark. So we're just going to explore a few issues coming out of the presentations there. I mean, it strikes me that I don't need to convince either of you of the potential of agroecological food production, be it urban or peri-urban. But the devil is in the detail, as is always the case with these things. And I wanted just to explore sort of broadly conversation around measurement, maybe dip back into the kind of impacts and challenges, that potential, really, is it that good? Because it sounds great. But then also getting into the kind of, making it happen. And I think that will bring us nicely into the next part of the event. For the breakouts. So the first bit about measurement, it's basically I was sort of sharing a revelation, I suppose, which I had fairly recently when I kind of got to grips with how it is we go about measuring our carbon emissions. And how do we do it, Richard? Can you share that with the audience? What's the basics?
So typically when we're looking at carbon footprinting, if you want to call it that, you draw a box around the process, the town, the city, the factory, the organisation, whatever you do. And you look at inputs and outputs from that. And they are divided into 3 scopes. Scope 1 is direct emissions. So that's gaseous emissions from your activity. Everything you burn gives off carbon dioxide. and possibly some nitrous oxide as well. But also fugitive emissions from processors. So bubbling tanks of things. If you make beer, as you talked about before, you've got fermentation that gives off greenhouse gases. In agriculture, you've got the use of nitrogen fertilizers. Most of the nitrogen that you spray on the ground oxidizes and is given off as nitrous oxide. So there's gaseous emissions there, scope 1. Scope 2 is where somebody else does that work for you. So essentially it's buying electricity or potentially buying heat. So there's a power station somewhere, they are burning gas, they're creating electricity, and that's like an indirect emission. But these are really generally all around energy consumption. What we ignore is scope 3, and they are the emissions that are linked to goods and services that you buy. So generally when people draw that box around their activity, they ignore the fact that they buy materials, they ignore that they buy services from somebody else. And it gives organisations and people the opportunity to essentially offshore that, either as far afield as Worksop, or overseas completely, or just to put it in the too difficult box. And it's often put in the too difficult box because it is really difficult to do. If we as South Yorkshire wanted to look at the complete material flows into and out of our region, you can imagine the difficulty that that entails. So most people look at scope 1 and 2 because they're the measurable ones. You get an energy bill, you can see it. And if everybody in the world only looks at scope 1 and 2, it's fine, because your scope 3 emissions generally are somebody else's scope 1 and 2, and you can follow that supply chain all the way up until somebody digs something out of the ground. But if you only look at it in isolation, you have to be really careful about, as I say, that offshoring of emissions, where you say, well, we won't do that particular process anymore, we'll buy that in from somebody else, and all those emissions that we used to count disappear. So the way I say, if you can't do a full footprint, scope 1, 2 and 3, what you can do is look at it on a project by project basis. So if you want to look at, well, let's get rid of our diesel tractor and buy a John Deere electric tractor, if you want to look at the full carbon implications of that, you need to look at the scope 3 as well and say, is this on a life cycle analysis a net benefit for the planet? Might be a net benefit for you because you're moving from diesel to electric, but it kind of stops us doing the thing of trying to buy our way out of the problem, which as a society is what we tend to do. How can I buy something to solve this problem? How can I get an electric car rather than a diesel car to solve a problem?
So run
Long
that by me
answer,
again. No, long answer, but I think really, really important. So help me if I'm understanding this correctly. So if it doesn't happen here, we're not measuring it?
To some extent.
Okay, so because this is the revelation, this was the penny drop moment for me when I was reading the Arup Pathways to Zero report, and took time to go to the presentations, read the report, and I suddenly found myself thinking, what does this measure? And I asked that question, and I got the detailed technical answer, which you've shared with us, which is absolutely critically important detail. And I suddenly went, oh, so based on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions being what we've measured here currently within the Sheffield local authority area, where's food?
Yeah, and it's where's all product. And this is something that we need to grasp as people when we're looking at projects like this. If you took Waitrose car park next door and you said that's currently inert, it's tarmac, it does nothing.
Right.
I'm going to dig that up and I'm going to grow local vegetables and sell them.
Sounds good already.
Sounds good already.
Yeah.
If you just did some basic carbon analysis, the carbon footprint of this region would go up. Because currently we're not looking necessarily at the embedded carbon of growing those carrots remotely. We might look at the transport once they cross the border and they come down the parkway, but we're not looking at the true impact of where we get our stuff from.
So, and Mark, you presented that actually looks like a very detailed analysis of Organic Lee's life cycle assessment. LCA is often what it's called, isn't it? And that struck me as incredibly detailed, you know, where you drilling down to individual activities. But that really is quite a challenging thing to do at a regional level or even a sub-regional level. So somehow we've got to find our way through this sort of major challenge of measuring and understanding the situation. I mean, what's happening at a city region level to
Putting me on the spot now.
well, now's the time.
It's almost like setting the target is the easy bit, and it is, and we can all do it. We can all say we're going to be carbon neutral by a certain point, but then getting enough of a data set to be able to make informed, evidence-based decisions is the difficult bit.
Right.
So, and I'll have this conversation with everybody when they say, look at what we're doing, and I've been out to see Hugh, and Hugh's shown me his apple trees, and I've said, they look fantastic. How do I know that buying an apple from Moss Valley is better than somebody doing this at scale in, for example, John Kent, where they're growing at much bigger scale and they're bringing them in a truck? So I think at that kind of level, you can do that analysis. And that's how you can tackle this problem, is by breaking it down into chunks and saying, well, let's look at this particular case study. To build an entire model of the region and its entire activity is too big a study, and we'll miss the target while we're still getting the numbers together. But we can start to try and make informed decisions at that smaller level.
Yeah. So once I'd understood this scope 1, 2 and 3 and some of the issues that presents, because they're incredibly complex, and once you start to understand that, you also start to come to terms with the challenge that are facing our combined authorities, our local authorities, and also big businesses who are major emitters. It's not an easy thing to do. But then in terms of the regional economy and its commitment to net zero, I did start thinking, right, well, where does food feature in other respects? Because if it's not there being measured from a carbon point of view, because it doesn't happen in the region, how is it being measured from an economic point of view? Now, we've had the benefit of other events, where we've spoken about this as an issue, and it's about the kind of narrative around food. So part of our narrative is missing. I think, could we agree on that? Yep. So food isn't being measured from a carbon point of view. So what else is missing from the food narratives? Because ultimately, these are what matter. This is how we relate to food culturally, socially. We don't think, oh, how much carbon am I eating today?
I mean, you do if you've got my job for a living. That's all you think about.
Well, that's why you're here.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you're exactly right that there are bits of narrative missing, and you could lay awake at night worrying about these things, and some nights I do. But again, I'd say we can only sort of chunk off the bits that we can look at, the bits that we can analyse, and we can only try and make those decisions. Food is in every aspect of our life. It might not appear in lots of reports as a line item, but the vans driving around the street, maybe half of them are food deliveries. The trucks, the businesses that operate here. So again, I point at the supermarket next door. There is a carbon footprint to their operation. The majority of that carbon footprint is around providing food locally for us. So we can analyse some of that, and we can look at the impact of some of that in terms of a hard numbers carbon footprint point of view. Where it gets more difficult is to look at the social gains from it. Yeah. Because, I'm an engineer by trade, so it's spreadsheets and numbers for me, and if I can add up two numbers and see which way we should go, I can do that. When it comes to social good, that's much more difficult. When it's about the just transition, when it's about inclusion and outcomes, they're harder to measure in the short term, because typically their impacts are in the long term, and how do you do that? You can't have a control group of kids who you choose not to send to school to see what the outcome would be to compare and contrast.
Yes, absolutely.
It's quite difficult.
Very challenging. Mark, go on.
I think it's really important, and I think so. I think when it comes to the numbers and the technical side of it, we need to be aware of where those perverse incentives might arise, so that we can deal with them. And are we looking at the instance of the car park, for instance? Actually, there's all the cars coming to and from, and actually, so there's a wider kind of impact on behaviours and things like that the presence of the car park has that might make it neutral if you're looking at it like this, but not if you look at it like this. And so I think there's something about that lens. But also, your point about the social impacts, but then the cultural ones, even harder to measure. But food particularly, we have relationships with food that are about identity. So you talk about Kent and apple growing, you might talk about the rhubarb triangle, we have local produce and had local cultures around that, which had festivals associated with them, that had all kinds of sharing and swapping and kind of social relationships that were built around them, and that gave people a sense of identity of place. And that you can't put numbers on, you can't measure, but it's really important. And I think increasingly sort of cities and places are recognising the importance of those elements that make this place special, that make this place somewhere I want to live, I want to work, I want to raise my kids.
So we've got these, the recognition of the importance of a narrative around food, and we're saying that certain parts of that narrative are either missing or we have a limited understanding of them, whether that's carbon emissions, whether that's the social impact or the cultural impact. That to me is incredibly important and very relevant to this wider discussion. And I think there's a significant opportunity at a regional level to fundamentally change the narrative around food, where we can start to recognise that what we are currently seeing is a product of a disconnect, and in some cases, a fundamentally broken food system. I know that's a much bigger debate, because our food system is incredibly effective at feeding people, broadly speaking, in a way that it's never done historically. But talking about the sort of social and cultural benefits of particularly agroecological food production, that doesn't feature in our regional narrative. At the moment, it's predominantly an economic narrative around high-fat, salt, sugar foods being produced in low-wage, low-skilled jobs in factories that are producing primarily high-profit margin for supermarket-based food systems, where the profit is generated and leaves the economy and benefits others, as opposed to people who are here. And those that do benefit in some way economically are typically those in receipt of jobs that rely on a benefit system, that supports big employers to employ people at low wage, etc., etc. I mean, there's loads and loads of embedded problems. So the challenge there is how do we make a number of connections, to fill in these gaps, to change the narrative, and shift it from bad food to good food.
I think with all the problems that you've identified, myriad there, we won't solve them with tickling around the edges. We could look at a supermarket and a supermarket supply chain and make it the most carbon efficient that it could be. But you could look at it and say it's fundamentally the wrong supply chain, and it's the wrong way of looking at food distribution from growing through to retail. But it's very difficult to impose those changes. They have to be cultural and social changes. So it has to be a ground-up approach to changing that, where people, the people ask for a different way of living. And that comes to other things like livable neighbourhoods and active travel. It needs the people to say, I don't want cars whizzing around my neighbourhood, I'd like to close these streets off and make them for people and kids to play in. You can make the most efficient car, but fundamentally you have to at some point ask yourself, do we need that car in the first place? The same comes from food systems as well. Yeah. So often we do, as practitioners in this space, look to the technological solution, look to what we can actually achieve, like you say, focus on the economics, and we can make some improvements and we can make some changes, but we will reach a point where without societal change, we'll not get to where we need to be.
Yeah.
So it needs movements like this to say, there is another way.
There is, yes, and
can it be scalable up to a way where it can feed the whole region? I've no idea, and I guess we probably, in this room, some people think it can, some people maybe think it can't. Mm-hmm. How do we build those models that say this is what we'd need to do to get there?
Excellent. We've got 5 minutes, so if there are any questions in the room, I'm not sure if we can field any from the Zoom room virtually, but just stick your hand up. Essentially what we're sort of exploring are some of the fundamental challenges, and I wanted to sort of pick up the role of customer, or consumer behaviour. I don't particularly buy into the sort of that sort of. I much prefer the kind of active food citizen type concept, but that's maybe a reflection of sort of my values and what I would like to see in our food system. But you're absolutely right. In the end, it's public behaviour that drives a lot of these things, and that just makes it even harder. So what shall I do, Richard? You know?
Oh, well, we're running out of time, so I can't quite give you the answers now. But it is that change. People blame the supermarkets for things, and there is an element of truth in that. I think they have to take some responsibility for where we are now. But they respond to a customer drive.
They do.
They satisfy a need and they create the need at the same time. So blame has to sit in both parties there. That if you go and buy the cheapest thing, you will be rewarded with something next time that's even cheaper, because they're going to try and race to that market.
It's the race to the bottom.
It's the race to the bottom. So how we change that is...
I'm always very sceptical of kind of like behaviour change models, because they put too much blame, I think, or onus on individuals, when what we're dealing with here are systems.
It's an important point.
Yeah. And actually, people like local authorities and others have the ability, and central government have the ability to shift the system by what they incentivise and what they don't. I think your point about narratives is really important. We've just done some work around land narratives and the extent to which change is inhibited by the fact that if you want to change the land system, you're either seen as being like dangerous because you're trying to destabilise something that has been fixed for a very long time, or you're seen as not serious. You're seen as fringe, and I think the same is true with food. All the narratives around people who decide to change their diet for ethical or social reasons are kind of made jokes of.
Well, the alternative, aren't they?
Yeah, and so I think there's something about there's quite an insidious way in which our current narratives prevent change, and I think we have to really look at that, and we have to find new narratives that don't alienate people, that make people going back to the consumer choice thing, going, actually, I could do something different, and it wouldn't be weird, and I wouldn't have to explain it to my friends, and all that kind of stuff. So we have to do some work around that, I think, of like looking at what the barriers are to those changes and coming up with new narratives that are more acceptable and kind of adoptable by people, I think, and understood, felt.
The point made by Julie earlier when she was talking about food poverty was the fact that in some areas of our city and our region, people don't have local access to fresh fruit and vegetables. And we as a society have moved from where there was a greengrocer on every street to a place now where your access is determined by how you can get to a supermarket.
Transport is a fundamental.
And so for some people who are in transport poverty and fuel poverty and food poverty, they don't have the access to that, so their choices are limited. So no matter how much we could persuade them that buying fresh fruit and cooking it yourselves might be a better option, they simply can't do that. So there are structural changes that need to be made to give people access, along with the education to explain to people why they might want to make those changes.
So what emerges often out of these sorts of debates, because we're not going to solve it all in 20 minutes, but is a realisation that that key difference between shifting the blame onto individuals versus the kind of system change, and the need for system change, and often with the sort of systems thinking that comes with that sort of assumption that we need to change the system, not the person. It is a holistic view of how do we all make it work, and that's something that historically we've not been particularly good at, particularly at a sort of local government or regional government or national government level. There's a tendency for silos, and everyone talks about joined up thinking because there's a deficit of joined up thinking. And I think this is where, for me, this is the case for food partnership, and ways of working together in ways that do join together different parts of a food system that would otherwise be continue to be fragmented and disjointed, whether that's from a policy or practice point of view. So where does then the food strategy? And I think this is the sort of final point I want to I suppose leave as a question really in terms of action planning. And this is what the breakouts are about in the final part of the event. So how are we going to then translate all this understanding and awareness of the problems and of the challenges that we're facing, and turn them into action plans, turn them into renewed and refreshed food strategies, potentially where they don't even exist in the first place. Where is our regional food strategy? We have a regional economic strategy, and we have local government food strategies, but they need updating because the world's changing very rapidly, isn't it? So that's really the kind of question for the breakouts is, how do we move this forward in action? I think, and Mark, you're facilitating the breakout in this room, and I'm looking over to Fran. Are we moving straight into the breakouts now?
Oh, yes.
We are. Come and grab a mic, and we'll move things on.
Okay, so we have 4 breakout rooms, one of which is taking place here, the other 3 which are taking place digitally. So we have 3 different themes for the breakout rooms. Rob from Sustain is going to be taking the improving access to land support and capital, which was our theme from this morning. So all the Zoom attendees are welcome to join whichever room they feel suits them best or which they'd like to reflect on. Rachel is going to be taking the session on what actions can be taken by the local authority. So that was the session with Councillor Alison Teal and Councillor Julie Grocutt. And room 3 will be discussing what we've just been talking about just now, talking more on a regional basis and some of the issues that have come up with that. So those rooms will be coming up very shortly. So the idea is to go through those questions, and also please, any other questions that come through, notes will be taken, those notes will be emailed to me, and then I'll do my best to represent them back to the main room, which is quite a challenge, so we'll do our best. All right, thank you.
Okay. So I think at that point we'll turn this room into a breakout room.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, all the other breakout rooms get launched digitally. That's
right.
The plan.
Amazing.
We'll be back here by 1:05. That's the latest.
Okay.
All around then.
Okay, so we've got just under 12 minutes.
Yeah, 12.
Okay, and welcome back, everybody, from your breakout rooms. I hope the conversations were engaging and they reflected the proceedings today. Now, obviously, with this being a hybrid event, it's quite a challenge, technically speaking, but just want to, first of all, say thanks very much to the University of Sheffield AV Tech team who've been with us all this morning. Done an amazing job, guys. There's a thumbs up at the back of the room. That's good. And you'll be pleased to hear that lunch is on us today. So, we can't wait. It smells delicious. Obviously, in normal times, we would all be together, and our aim would be to feed you all. And one day that will happen again. That's a promise, personally, from me to you all and anybody else that comes to future events. It's such an important part of the proceedings. So again, thank you to everybody who's made this possible. And, I'm going to hand over to Fran, who's just going to explain briefly what's happening next with the event proceeding. So, Fran.
So there had been a plan originally to try and take some of the comments from the breakout rooms forward to a quick discussion at the end, but time is not going to permit that today. So we really do value your contributions. They are important, which is why we opened it up to the public in the first place. So those notes will be collated, they will be sent off to me, and I'm going to make sure that they feature as part of the report that's going to be prepared. We've got all your email addresses. We will be sending you something post-event. So you can get in contact with us any time. Our email addresses will be on there if you want to have make some further comments, have further feedback to offer. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us, and I hope it's been interesting and illuminating. Thanks once again.
Indeed, and it's just for me to say thanks again, and take care with whatever you're doing, saving the world through food, and if you're into football, enjoy the football this evening. And yes, it is coming home. Bye.